Welcome back to the Growth Hacking Culture podcast. Today, we are diving into a topic that challenges our assumptions about ethical living and the impact of our choices. We often comfort ourselves with good intentions, even myself, believing that our hearts are in the right place. But what if those intentions aren't enough? What if inaction, the things that we don't do, carries just as much, if not more, weight than our actions? Consider this. Globally, millions of people suffer from preventable diseases, yet a fraction of the resources needed to address these issues is ever allocated. Corporations, my favorite topic, meanwhile, often tout sustainability goals while their day-to-day operations contribute to environmental degradation. Individuals might donate to a cause once a year, but avoid changing their daily habits that contribute to the systemic issues. And perhaps the most pressing question, the one we often avoid asking ourselves is, should we even care? Is it possible that genuinely care about these vast, seemingly insurmountable problems while also navigating the realities of financial impact, personal well-being, and the demands of modern life? I have the impression that we live in a world where the consequences of inactions are becoming increasingly dire. Climate change, social inequality, animal suffering demand more than just well-meaning thoughts. We need concrete, impactful action. Today, we are going to be exploring the inconvenient truth that good intentions alone won't cut it. We are going to dig a little bit on the psychology of inactions, the misconceptions we hold about ethical behavior, and how we can shift from passive observers to active change makers. And we are going to get started. My guest today, and I mentioned to him already before, I get super excited when I have guests with impressive CV, is Nick Cooney, a leading expert on effective altruism, behavioral change, and the psychology of ethical action. He is the author of several influential books, including Change of Heart, What Psychology Can Teach Us About Changing Opinions and Behavior. And by the way, I saw even Spanish versions. That was funny to read it in Spanish, to see the title in Spanish, in fact. He has also been publishing about why we love and exploit animals, bridging insights from philosophy and psychology. His work has been featured in major media outlets. He's a sought after speaker for organizations and individuals looking to make a real difference. And something that is quite kind of controversial is that he is the managing partner of a venture capitalist firm. Wow, these two things usually don't go together, doing good and venture capitalist. But here's the thing, it's not whatever venture capital company. It is a leading Lever VC, where he is the managing partner, is a leading food tech and edutech specialist venture capital firm, investing globally in entrepreneurs creating the future of protein. Is that correct, Nick?
You're correct there. Yes, indeed. Thanks, Ivan, and thank you very much for having me on. I'm definitely looking forward to the conversation here.
Listen, Nick, as I mentioned before, it's not usual that we see a venture capitalist talking about the topics that you express about changing the world, good intentions, doing good. How did it come? How did you end up in that direction? Was it something that you had like from the beginning when you were young and inspiring to change the world, or
Yeah.
is this something that happened little by little?
Yeah, great question. And I'm sure we'll chat shortly about sort of the growth hacking side and how that concept ties into the book and what we're chatting about today, which is sort of growth hacking, our own ability to have significant positive impact on the world. But if we leave that sort of thing to the side for the moment, is kind of taking a more analytical approach about how we can do a lot of good, be more efficient, be more successful. And if I'm just answering your question, like in any way, how or why did I start caring about things in the world and hoping to have a positive impact? I think for me, there was probably two influences, both also like somewhat divergent from one another. I would say one was being raised Catholic, which I'm not still religious today, but was raised Catholic, Catholic school, church, etc. And I think one lasting thing that I was left with from that was the sense of there is right and wrong. You should really try to do the right thing as much as you can. So I think that was one reason.
Mm.
And the other thing, punk rock music, really, and got into it as a teenager, and I think probably led me to question a lot of things. And I think the combination of those provided a bit of a segue into advocacy, activism, caring about various social issues from animal welfare to the environment, to, of course, human issues and so forth. So yeah, I'd say from a young age, those were the things that probably put me on that path of thinking about impact that I and others have on the world and hoping to try to have as much of a good one as possible overall.
Well, you really got me with this punk story because, by the way, I am still a good fan of punk music. I got hooked with punk music, gothic music back in the 80s. I was young and I believe that everything that was is described in this type of music is important. You have mentioned Catholic. Well, to tell you the truth, most of the religions carry the good message of doing good. Nevertheless, it looks like religion is never enough to do the right thing because if we still the majority of the world is has belongs to a religion. People belongs to a religion, and there is in the faith there is the good deeds that everybody should follow, regardless of the religion. I don't know, except if you are Satanist, but I in Europe we don't know Satanists. In your country, I have heard that you discover Satanists. I don't know how, but anyways, but what makes the difference that there should be more than just religion or the way we have the education from our parents that makes the difference because it's not only religion. People in that are religious have also done horrible things in the world. How do you become a good person?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And of course, there's so many ways you could tackle it. There's a few researchers trying to look from a neuroscience and psychological perspective, or even a biological perspective. Like, are there actual, biological differences or differences in brain chemistry or functioning of people who are really trying to do a lot of good in the world, et cetera, versus more typical people versus on the other end of the spectrum, psychopaths, for example. So we could look at it from a biological neurochemistry perspective. Of course, we could look at it from a cultural perspective, a social perspective. I think one way to look at that, and like one thing that provides an easy answer as to why both religions generally, but more generally even still, us as most of us as individuals, don't pay a huge amount of time or attention to, are we making the world a better place for others? What are our actions or inactions? What impact are those having on others? Is I think just the evolutionary reason, right? Like we're a mammal species, right? And so I think if we ask the same question of monkeys or dogs or any, birds, you name your species, why are they not living their life, really thinking a lot about, are they improving the lives of other dogs or other birds or things like that? We get the evolutionary reasons, right? Like they evolved to survive. Those that survive the best pass those genes on. So the package of genes that they inherited, the package of genes we inherited, are genes not crafted towards being ethically fantastic or being really altruistically minded. It's a package of genes that are there because they were the best for survival in the past and the conditions things were in the past. And so that's kind of the basic wiring that pretty much all of us are born with. And so I think when it gets to this question then of, okay, if we like, how can we be more thoughtful about how we live in the world, the impacts we have on others? In some cases, it involves really leaning into some of those instincts we have, like the instinct towards altruism, towards caring about others who are like us, at least others in our
Mm.
communities and so forth, kind of leaning into that general spirit, which we do have evolutionarily. And in some cases, I think having a big positive impact on the world and growth hacking that ability to have a big personal impact on others involves often paying attention to and then going against some of those psychological predispositions that we have.
Mm. It, we often use we often use the claim that to be human is to be good. Sometimes I wonder, in fact, Nick, that if it's in fact the opposite, that we have also the capacity to look at other people um, and dehumanize that person. if it is, let's say, somebody who thinks differently than us, that has belongs to another nationality. We also have the like this bad thing embedded in our brain that we can make somebody an enemy out of bullshit that we hear from somebody else. Uh, isn't it like the two things are competing? We want to be good, but at the same time, we have the capacity to change opinions, have and turn it so that we have the right, I don't know, to kill or don't care about someone or the planet, by the way.
Yeah. I totally agree. Yeah, I would think a statement like any statement about people being inherently good or inherently bad is just like a rather ridiculous oversimplification. I mean, just it doesn't square with reality, right? I mean, you're right. I mean, when it comes to caring about other people, we are both obviously, and I mean, there are tens of millions, hundreds of millions of examples of this. Like people would do extreme things to protect and care for those that are close to them, those on their team, those in their tribe, those in their country, right? Give their life, give their life day by day, or like literally physically die and give their life in various ways to help their family, to help their community, help their country. And on the other hand, there's also obviously hundreds of millions, billions of examples of we're doing the slightest thing on our own part could dramatically improve the life of somebody else or prevent their suffering. And we just truly don't care and we do nothing, even when we know about it, we know we could do it. Or even going even further to that, and as you mentioned, we'll go into actively harming others. It's so easy to get into a us versus them mindset and then not just not care, but actually work to actively harm. So indeed, I think there's just such a wide range of things that our predisposition could lead us in one way, lead us in another, just depending on the circumstances. There's not really some clear good or clear bad. There's also not some very clear ethical consistency, I think, for most people, if we're thinking about the total impact of our actions on others around us.
Hmm. Uh, One of the reasons why I kind of beg you to be in this podcast is because I got inspired by the new book that you are launching. It's still not live. And the book is What We Don't Do in Action of the Faith in the Face of Suffering and the Drive to Do More. Now, I picked some parts of your book. And I wanted to ask you, you argue that inactions today can have greater consequences than actions. Is it possible that for you to give me an example? Because I resonate with that, but I think that we should always visualize this part because it's not about harming, it's about don't when you don't do nothing about something that is burning in front of you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's a counterintuitive idea. It's one that we don't usually hear or read about or hear others express, and so it takes a little bit to unpack it. But let me give I give a fictional historical anecdote in the book, and so let me give that because I think it does a good job of kind of teeing it up. So imagine there was this very wealthy merchant lived a couple hundred years ago. Uh, by all general measures, was a good guy. Earned his money honestly, earned a lot of money. Like was very very wealthy relative to the town he lived in. But by all general measures, was a good guy. Like did things to help his community. Like gave some money to support some local artists. Took care of his family. Didn't cheat. Didn't steal. Respected member of the community, etc. One winter, a bad famine hit the town. Crops were failing, and this was hundreds of years ago. A lot of people in the town were facing starvation, either really suffering or some of them started to die. And he had people starting to knock on his door because he was one of the richest folks in town and say, "Hey, like my family's starving. Please, anything. Can you give us any food? Can you help us?" And he certainly had the ability to. He had plenty of wealth. He had plenty of food stores. He and his family were definitely set. But he didn't. He said, "No, sorry, I can't help you." And over the course of that winter, hundreds of people in the town died. Now, if that person, this fellow gets to the end of his life, and we were reflecting back on his life and asked the question of, okay, was this a good guy? Did he live a good life? I think by many conventional measures, we would say yes. Again, he was kind to his family, didn't break the law, honest in his dealings, did some things to help others, etc. But I think it would stick in our mind that there was this one big omission where he had the ability to save people's lives. He had the ability to really reduce the suffering of others at no real cost to himself, right? Like he wasn't going to die, he wasn't going to suffer, but he chose not to. So his inaction, the consequence of his inaction was many people dying, and he could have prevented it. That's really what we're talking about. And this, again, this is a fictional anecdote from hundreds of years ago. But if we fast forward to the current day and to people like you, people like me, people like I'm sure nearly every one of your listeners, the reality is we are in exactly the same situation today that this fictional fellow was hundreds of years ago, in the sense that nearly all of us in Europe, in the US, in most industrialized countries, even those who are middle class, even lower income earners in our respective countries, have dramatically more wealth and resources than billions of other people around the world. And we have the ability to save the lives or dramatically reduce the suffering of huge numbers of others. And so the question is, do we do that? Do we take our time, money, energy, resources and do that? Or do we act like this fellow in the fictional fellow in this anecdote and just say, sorry, I'm not going to help. I'm not going to put my time and money and resources to helping you. I'm just going to take care of my own. So I think that would be an example. And of course, we can get into more specifics from there, but that would be hopefully an illustrative example of what I mean.
I think this topic is super relevant for today. We are living times where we don't care anymore, where we are looking for convenience, we are looking to protect our wealth. Um, Generosity is losing, in fact, share of market in the world. And by the way, not so long time ago, I don't remember who published an article, a study about kindness in the world. So kindness in the world during the times of COVID increased a little bit, so we were caring more about others, and suddenly, since 1 year, this kindness in the world is declining. I have to find out. I did a post about it 1 week ago, and now I forgot where I found these numbers. But indeed, so people believes that being good is about following the rules. These rules could be coming from religion, from philosophy, from societal rules, but it's almost to me is that if you want to be good, you have to play with the gray zone. You have to put aside these rules and do something that is kind of even dangerous as an individual. Because if you have to save lives, maybe you have to disobey certain rules put by the country. I still remember that just for the story, in Switzerland, a guy who let 1,500 Jewish people come inside of the of the country during the Second World War, he was made innocent only 15 years ago. So he was a border guy in the border, working on the border between Austria and Switzerland, and he let the people go. But he was accused as being a criminal. So it's almost like you have to break the rules. Is that correct, Nick? Is that something that you believe? Because kind of I'm on the edge for that. Huh?
I think I'm sure there are endless examples in history where you are right. And I mean, you gave a very specific and poignant example. I'm sure there are endless examples where that is also the case. I would say the good news though is that creating a huge amount of good does not require that for those of us today. I mean, hopefully none of us will find ourselves in the situation that that border guard found themselves in decades ago, where we have to make that choice. Uh, the reality is, for most of us, there's no need to violate the law, do anything illegal, even do anything that's going to cause negative repercussions to ourselves, other than giving up some of our money, giving up some of our time, giving up some of our mental energy and relaxation. I think there's that personal cost that can come from doing more to help others. Not necessarily, right? Because doing more to help others gives positive benefits as well, right? A feeling of meaning, a feeling of purpose in life, a sense of agency of I can have some positive influence over the world around me. I can bring about the world I want to see. But I would say the negatives are more in that other category of maybe we're spending a little less time relaxing. We give up some of our money, et cetera. I think the good thing is that we, again, people like you and me and the countries we live in such resource-rich countries, and there's so much ability to create so much positive change just by allocating some of our time, money, and energy to others, that there's no need to even start thinking about breaking the law or things like that, because We don't need to do those things to have a really major impact today in the world today.
So now that you have mentioned about these important resources, money, time, and mental energy, as the resources that we can play with, um, how do we decide to effectively allocate these resources in order to maximize the impact? Because obviously we don't want to put everything in a small little cause. We want to reach as much as possible people and also to that these resources multiply somehow. And I have a secondary question because this podcast is also heard listened by a lot of people in the corporate world. And I guess that when we say money, time, and mental energy, this is valid also for bloody corporates. So
Yeah.
how can we balance and allocate correctly uh, these resources?
Yeah. And as you mentioned earlier, I mean, I'm in an aspect of the corporate world, at least in the finance world myself. I founded and run a venture capital firm that, as you noted, invests in certain types of companies in the sustainable food and healthy food and ag tech space. So I'm in that world, and in my day job, what I do professionally is run the fund. And so certainly with that work day in and day out, and for years, what the general approach is to think very analytically about opportunity, investment opportunity, and generating the best return on investment we can. And certainly that involves both at the high level for our team, developing a culture that maximizes the time, intelligence, et cetera, that our team has. But then also in looking at companies, thinking about their strategy, their business strategy, their go-to-market strategy, expansion strategy, et cetera, and how to be most efficient in those things. So like my day to day is very much in this analytical mindset of what's going to allow for the most growth and most efficient growth. The book, and on this, when we come to this general topic of doing good for others, the harms that can come from our inaction, et cetera, the way of thinking they advocate in the book and talk through kind of the whys and hows of it is how to take this similar analytical mindset that's focused on the greatest productivity and apply it in this other area where it's not usually applied, which is doing good for others. And indeed, in that area of doing good for others, usually we associate that with empathy, kindness, kind of like a soft fuzziness, right? Like a feel goodery, right? Like it's something that should feel good, do good. But we don't really associate it with a very quantitative, analytical approach of maximizing returns on the investments of our money, time, and energy. But I argue in the book, and what I certainly think is that we should, that if we really like, if in the part of our life that we allocate to charitable endeavors, to doing good things for others, if what we care about is impact, right, is what we care about is other people who are in extreme suffering less, other people who might die not dying. For a person like myself who cares a lot about animal protection and the extreme harms animals endure, reducing the number of animals that suffer in extreme misery. If we care about any of these sort of things, improving happiness and reduce suffering in the world around us, then probably we should put in the mental energy and the time, as well as ultimately the financial resources to maximize that impact, right? So it's hundreds, thousands of people that have significant improvements to their lives, not one or two. And so that is really a big part of what the book is all about. But as you noted at the top of the show, like in that Venn diagram of like being hard charging, trying to create positive change in the world. I'm sorry, being hard charging, trying to create financial success and grow companies and so forth. That mindset is over here, one spot. And then on the other side of the ledger, there's again this kind of feel good. There's not usually a lot of overlap between the two. And my viewpoint and what the book talks through is why I think there should be, and the great positive impacts that could come for the world if more of us as individuals do try to cultivate that mindset and take that approach in our own lives.
You're right. In fact, in in a lot of corporations, there is still this mindset that if you need to put some money to work for the good of the planet and our society, it's going to be run by, I don't know, by a bunch of idealists, creative hippies who will use it for the good, but there is nothing in return. I'm came to my mind also that 15 years ago, when I was still working in the corporate world, I had a look at the investment that this big company, American company where I was working, they were putting some money, but it was donations. It wasn't So, and most of the money was going into things that could save the world, but we weren't even sure. And we were talking about millions. But there was no tracking. And I still remember also looking at a certain of the reports from the Red Cross. I do believe that they do good for the society, but there must be a lot of inefficiency. I don't like it when I see people in the Red Cross having big villas by the Lake of Geneva, having salaries of $20,000 per month, when they should be in the field saving the world. So there is a lot of inefficiencies that that goes together with the perception that we have of these organizations using money to help the world.
Um,
And what I like about your case is that you are using the mindset of a financial shark, a venture capitalist eyes, in order to use the money and potentially, if it is possible, bring back revenues and be able to track, because there is a lot of fluff in the how do we measure impact. Uh, is that right? Do you have the impression that that's a perception that the first interaction that they will have with you, they will think that you are an idealist? But is that true?
I don't think that most people, I don't personally get that sense that most people would read the book or hear me and think that I'm an idealist. I think pretty far on the more pragmatist end of the spectrum, but I think all the other points you made would definitely resonate with me. So, like for me in my own life, there's kind of these two domains. One, my professional work, what I do day to day on the investment side, where it is about maximizing returns. And that's what all the analysis and thinking and thought work and decisions aim towards. But then in the part of my life that is devoted to charity and philanthropy and making a positive impact, it's kind of taking, as you noted, a similar skill set and way of thinking about things and applying it just with a different end goal. Like in one case, you're maximizing financial return. In another case, you're maximizing positive impacts for others, reducing suffering, et cetera. And to your point, yeah, I mean, like if we looked at a big fan and proponent of the charitable sector. I've started multiple nonprofits. I sit on the board of one that I launched a number of years back called Lever Foundation, which works to advance sustainable food systems. So I'm a big proponent of really efficient charities. So let me just say that as the caveat to what I'll say next. What I'll say next is if we look at the nonprofit sector from a business efficiency lens, it is incredibly efficient for a couple of reasons. One is that there's virtually no connection between cash in and positive results out. Like if you think about the for-profit world, right? You're buying, I don't know, a TV. Like generally speaking, of course, like there's better quality products in the market that are underpriced or overpriced. There's low quality products that are overpriced or underpriced. There's always, some diversity of what's out there. But generally speaking, a product that's not very good, that doesn't deliver what customers want, or does it, but the price is outrageous, are going to go off the market, right? So there's general efficiency in many cases, not always, but generally pretty good efficiency at getting things to a point where the successful companies are cost efficiently producing something that delivers what the customer wants. When it comes to nonprofits, these two things are divorced because what most people donate, what's driving their donation decision is whether they have a friendly relationship with that NGO, whether they generally support that cause area, whether that cause area is relevant to them, kind of like, does it pull their emotional triggers? That's what gets the cash in. In terms of what comes out the other end, that efficiency, that impact, how much positive impact is being had on the world, that doesn't, for most donors, that doesn't really factor into the considerations that much. They want to make sure they're not donating to a scam. They want to make sure there's general credibility and like baseline professionalism. But whether a charity helps one person or 10 million, whether they do a small amount of good or a massive amount of good, for most donors, that's not really driving it. So there is not this feedback loop where more efficient output from the charity side stimulates more donations in the front end and creates this kind of virtuous cycle. You don't have that. And as a result, you do have the sort of inefficiencies that you were referring to, where there's millions and tens of millions of charities out there. There's some big ones, some medium sized and some small ones that are incredibly cost inefficient, either because of salaries or because of what they choose to do. And then you have some other charities of various sizes that are incredibly efficient, but might be not getting as much attention because they don't pull those emotional levers. So indeed, like that is, in my view, kind of the reality of the charitable landscape. And so if any one of us as individuals are taking the time to put some of our money or energy towards philanthropic efforts to make sure that money is not wasted, our time is not wasted,
Mm.
it does require putting in some real mental effort, kind of thinking through these things, looking through these things, quantifying these things to make sure that the hard-earned money we have that we're giving away produces as much good as we can, as opposed to producing just a little bit of good, but that makes us feel warm and fuzzy inside.
Mm. It- Coming back to your book, in fact, there was a sentence that also I found it quite striking. You mentioned that the human mind is not optimized for ethics. So basically, we are rather a little bit in the dark side of the force. What do you mean by that? And
Yeah.
is there a way to counteract our mind's natural tendencies?
Yes, yeah. So great question. We spoke on that. I mean, we touched on this a little bit earlier in talking about sort of from an evolutionary perspective, why we are the way we are. That are we were not we were designed by evolution. Evolution designs us and every other species for survival in the environment that those species lived in, right? We were not designed to be this perfect ethical machine, and so we have a sense of ethics. We build ethics individually and collectively as societies, and some cases through religion, through laws, just sort of cultural norms. But these are heavily infused and biased one direction or another by evolutionary baggage that we have. Again, some good, but some harmful when it comes to making smart ethical choices. So I think in terms of why we are that way, like that's the ultimate root cause. What does it look like? I think there's a lot of examples we could point to of what does that look like in terms of us not being hardwired to make really logical, consistently logical ethical decisions. So one example, and again, there's countless examples. Maybe I'll give one or two random ones, and then one that's central to the book. So from random other areas, we have a range of ingrained biases. The writer, or now deceased writer, Daniel Kahneman, had a fantastic book about these called Thinking Fast and Slow. Yeah,
Animal.
yeah, excellent writer, excellent book, and talks through these ingrained biases that study after study after study have documented that pretty much all of us as human beings have. Some of these have nothing to do with ethics, others have a lot to do with ethics. So to give a couple examples, we are much more responsive to stimuli that is unexpected than expected. So for example, let's say today there was a car crash in California that killed 5 people. Or let's say we looked at the statistics and we know that today 500 people are going to die in California because of preventable heart disease. I'm making these numbers up, but just like probably they're directionally accurate. Are those things going to be on the news? No, they're not even going to be on the local news, most likely, definitely not national. On the other hand, someone commits a terrorist act, goes into a church or a club and shoots 5 people and kills them. National headlines for several days. We want to know all about the shooter, why, what happened, what happens next. Because one, and there's a few reasons for that, but the main reason is that one is sudden, unexpected, and very attention grabbing, and the others are routine. We know they happen day after day after day after day. So that's why one gets much more attention from us. But from an ethical perspective, like if we want to try to reduce the number of preventable deaths in the world, which of these are areas where we should be paying the most attention, where we can actually create the most progress? It's in the first two examples, right? Auto safety, healthy diets, exercise, those sort of things. We can way more lives are lost. We could save way more lives by focusing on those areas. But our instinct, the instinct of our attention is to pay attention to the latter, right? The shooting. That's
Mm.
just sort of one random example. Another example that's sort of core to the heart of the book would be this question of inaction versus actions, right? When we think about, am I a good person? Am I doing good things? Are you a good person or a bad person? We typically think about actions. Bad actions, like did you do bad actions? If so, what? And how bad were they? Good actions. Okay, what are the very specific good things I can see you doing? Or I know you did. I know that I did. We don't usually think about inaction. But if we
Mm.
think about back to the anecdote of the fictional wealthy guy hundreds of years ago, inaction can have really major negative consequences. But our instinct, our evolutionary hardwiring, our bias, the bias of our minds, is to not pay attention to that. So an example of that from the published literature is There's a study that's been done, and I think it was replicated at least once, where participants were given this hypothetical situation. So let's say there's two tennis players. I'll call them Boris and Andre, right? Just to make up names here. Big, great tennis stars about to be in a championship match against one another. Boris knows that Andre has a certain food allergy. That if Andre eats the foods he's allergic to, he's going to be debilitated. He's not going to be able to play well. Maybe we'll have to forfeit the match. Now they're going into the cafeteria the morning of the big match, the championship match. And Boris sees that Andre is picking up some food that has that stuff that Andre is allergic to. And if Andre eats it, he's going to get sick and almost surely lose the match. And now there's kind of two conditions presented. Half the people in the study were told Boris encouraged Andre to go ahead and eat that food that he knew he would be allergic to. For the other half of participants, they were told that Boris knew this was going on. He didn't actively encourage Andre to pick up that food, but he saw Andre putting that food on his plate. He knew what was going to happen, and he just did nothing. He did not act. He said nothing. He let it happen. So one that's a little more active encouragement, the other kind of inaction, passive bystander. But in both situations, the consequence is exactly the same. Andre gets sick, and Andre can't compete. Andre loses the match. And participants were then asked to judge, like, what do you think about Boris? Was what he did wrong? Is he a bad person for doing that? And the folks who had been told that Boris sort of proactively encouraged Andre to do this were much, much more critical of Boris, thought he was a much, much worse person. And there's numerous other studies that document this, but long story short, there's this very documented human bias where we view actions that cause harm as way, way, way worse than inactions that cause exactly the same harm. So that would just be, again, one example among many of these ingrained, for whatever reason, psychologically, culturally, from evolution, these ingrained hardwirings we have that lead us to ethical intuitions and ethical judgments that are very unrelated to the real world consequences for real world people around us.
You use a word that I often use also for myself. People don't pay attention. And that makes me think this little sentence is that it's so important because we live it day to day. We are in the flow of work. We are focused on what we do. We are focused on our families. And we don't pay attention enough about what is in our peripheral view. And that might be related to either our inaction. And what I wanted to ask you is, what should we do in order to pay attention? Is there some practical, because as you mentioned, it comes from the brain. So we have a bunch of biases that have been created, formatted, programmed in our brain, and we don't pay attention. We don't take the time to pause and reflect about what we are doing. And we are just qualifying things according to, I don't know, the Ten Commandments or whatever say a holy book is going to tell us, or what our father told us, because it goes faster than reflecting on ourselves. So is there any specific actions that we can take as human beings to don't go just in autopilot without paying attention?
Yeah. Yeah, and exactly what you're describing, the tendency we all have to autopilot, is another one of those ingrained tendencies we have that evolutionarily makes sense, right? Like there's so much stimuli around us. We can't pay attention to everything at all times, right? So we're very selective, and our default is, if it worked before, just keep doing it. If it's the norm, just do it. If other people are doing it, probably just do it. So in many cases, acting on autopilot is good. It's the right thing to do, and we have no option other than to do that. But when it comes to consequential things, like consequential decisions about how we live our life, what's right, what's wrong, what's important to us in our own lives, it's certainly those sort of circumstances where we should make sure we are turning off the autopilot switch, and we are really taking the time to think through it carefully and as kind of analytically and logically as we can. So in terms of how to do that, I think the step one is just deciding for ourselves, hopefully deciding for ourselves that this area we've been chatting about today, this area of the impact we have on others in the world around us, like what we do to address extreme suffering in the world, deciding for ourselves that, okay, that's one area where I don't want to always be on autopilot. I don't want to ignore it. let me actually take some time to think through it, today, this week, but also on an ongoing basis, right? There's other areas of our life where we do the same thing. I think probably for many of us, for our career, hopefully for our relationship, maybe it's for some people, there's the favorite sports team or whatever it is, right? Like we all have certain areas where we're not on our autopilot. We go back to it, we think about it a lot, we mull about it a lot. We always try to like be smarter. I think step one is hopefully for many of us choosing that, okay, this area, addressing the extreme suffering that exists in the world around us and having a positive impact on the world. This should be another area that I add to those others that I'm going to pay attention to. I'm going to think through on a recurring basis and try to make smart decisions around. From there, it then gets into all the nuances and specifics of, okay, if I want to have this positive impact, how do I do that? What does it look like? What do I do with my money? What do I do with my time? Where do I put those things to have the biggest impact? And there's a lot more discussion we could get into around that. But I think that first step is just deciding that, reminding ourselves there's a lot of very extreme suffering in the world by people just like us and by animals just like the dog or cat we have at home. We have the ability to help huge swaths of those, like literally hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of those others. And that is an important thing that we should keep in mind to address. I think that's the step one of paying attention.
Hmm. The word that I wanted to highlight of what you say is about you say use the word recurrent. And this is very important because biases have been formed by repetition of the same stuff that has come into our brain and has programmed the way we see the world. So we need to apply the same logic. If we care about something, we need to take the time in a daily basis to repeat it. It doesn't mean that during work at any time or all the time. It means make the time, your 2 minutes or 5 minutes to say, what have I done about this specific thing that I mentioned 2 months ago that I really give a shit? And if
Yeah.
you do, then use the time wisely.
Absolutely. If we care about something, we'll put in the mental effort for it. If we love somebody, if we're in a relationship with someone we care about, we'll put in the mental energy to think about what's going to make them happy, what can we do that's fun, like those sort of things, right? Same for caring about the world, same for our job, same for anything else.
I had the time to highlight another thing that struck me in your book. You say that apathy is the opposite of love. And I want you to elaborate a little bit more about this sentence because it is quite powerful. And I think that for a lot of humans, if we understand that, we can understand how many horrible things in the world have happened. It's not people doing the harm that created so much pain in the world. Sometimes it has been the people who knew and didn't decided not to do anything.
Yeah.
Tell me more about this. Apathy is the opposite of love.
Yeah. So this is a quote I heard decades ago that really lodged itself in memory because it did seem like there was a lot of truth to it and something that truth to it that we should reflect on and act on. And I think the best of my memory, and my memory might be a bit off, but roughly the longer quote was, the opposite of love is not hate, the opposite of love is apathy.
Yeah.
And so I think, like, what is the truth there? So I mean, I think there's a couple ways we could dissect this, but in terms of like how does that apply to the conversation we're having here today? To your point, I think if we look around, if we think about the harms that exist in the world today, like people who are suffering in extreme ways where they don't need to, right? Like it's preventable, it doesn't have to happen. Obviously, some of that is caused by bad human behavior, right? Russia invading Ukraine, somebody going out and killing somebody else, somebody causing very significant emotional harm to somebody else. Like there's obviously lots of examples where harms that exist are from people doing bad actions to other people or to animals or to the environment, et cetera. But I would wager then when it comes to at least humankind and things humankind is touching, the majority of that suffering is not caused really from bad actions. It's happening because of inaction, failure to act. And so it's not coming from, you could call it hate or you could call it malice or just whatever, sort of like a bad place. It's not coming from bad place and people causing people to do bad things. It really is coming from that inaction. So if we look at starvation, if we look at people dying from preventable disease, if you look at people suffering from severe health ailments that are easy and cheap to fix if one has the money, if you look at the extreme suffering that animals endure in factory farms and other places like that, where clearly that doesn't have to happen. All of this is like the fact that it continues is in many of these cases caused by or allowed to continue through inaction, like people that had the ability to prevent this, to change this, to improve the situation, even though they're not the ones directly causing it, failing to take action to prevent those things or at least reduce those things. So yeah, to me, that's kind of how that quote resonates with the reality of the world we live in, and therefore the sort of existential reality that we face in choosing how to live our lives and what to do with the limited lives we have, with the limited time, money, and energy that each of us has.
Hmm. We are close to the ending of this episode, but I want you to to pick the one or two practical steps that a person, either a CEO in a big company who has the resources of the corporate world, or an individual can take to begin shifting from this inaction part to the action in their own lives.
Yeah. So I would say a couple things. So one would be go into it with the mindset that creating a positive impact on the world and creating a significant positive impact and whatever legacy one wants to have through that is not an easy thing to do. Like it takes time to learn how to do it very efficiently. Just like you can't decide to be a doctor and do a successful surgery the next week, or you can't decide to run a huge company and do that well the next week. Like it is a learning process. So I think go into it with that mindset of I don't know a lot. Let me learn and let me look for people who are thinking about it and approaching it the right way and particularly effective at what they do. Let me see how they think. Let me try to model myself off of that. So I think number one, starting with that mindset. And then number two, pushing oneself to grow over time. Like I use an analogy in the book of an ethical athlete or thinking about this like a professional athlete. I call it the Tom Brady rule. So for those, perhaps in Europe or other markets not familiar with this name, Tom Brady, the best NFL quarterback, American football quarterback, probably of all time, and also somebody known for having this really rigorous way of structuring his life to be the best player he could be, like very thoughtful about his diet, his sleep, like everything he could do to optimize himself as a professional athlete and do the best he could. And so I like to call this the Brady rule, right? So I mean, this is kind of step two slash three, four, five, six, seven. But once you're going, like once one of your listeners is trying to take action, like they stop and think about this, they realize that they do want to put more of their resources to reducing extreme suffering in the world. They have that, they go in with the mindset that I don't know a lot now, let me learn. I think having like following what I call the Brady rule would be a good rule to follow, which is if it worked for Tom Brady, it's probably going to, for being a good football player, it's probably going to work for you for being smarter at having a positive impact on the world. So what does that entail? Spending a lot of time thinking about it and working on it, being willing to put in the effort, the mental effort. I mean, in his case, the physical effort. For us, it's probably more the mental effort involved to think through this. Being willing to over time sacrifice, right? To give up some things. Like if we're giving more money away to really effective charities, it means less money for ourselves. So be willing to embrace some self-sacrifice for the cause of doing this thing that we find very important. And holding ourselves to a high standard, right? As high a standard as we're willing to set for ourselves, because the higher standard we set for ourselves, most likely the higher we'll end up performing and optimizing our performance to reach that high standard and that high goal. So I'd say those would be a couple things. More practically, I think there's some other great books out there that, aside from my own, that do speak to thinking through having a positive impact on the world. I would shout out a couple examples being Doing Good Better and The Life You Can Save by folks who are very well-known philosophers in this kind of world of effective altruism and doing good. But there's, of course, plenty of other content online on these topics. But yeah, I'd say those would, from a mental perspective, right? Like a setting yourself up mentally to succeed perspective. I think those are the key things I would highlight from at the start.
I think that we have to highlight a little bit more that if you have to pick a good start, for reading a little bit more about this. And I think your book speaks a lot with to people who are in the verge of questioning themselves, but they have maybe the mindset of being structured on their thoughts, analytical about how they're going to do it. And so sometimes this analytical power, it produces this, you take your time instead of doing. So I would really recommend to go and buy the book, What We Don't Do, Inaction in the Face of Suffering and the Drive to Do More. This book, it has been authored by Nick Cooney, and really have appreciated. I don't show it because in my Latino face, you don't see that when I'm sad or emotionally connected with somebody because I'm always smiling like any Latino. But really, I have appreciated in the the way you explain things. This combination of rationality of of your financial mind together with the wish of changing the world, it is quite touching, Nick. I really thank you very much for coming to be my guest in the Growth Hacking Culture podcast.
Thanks so much, Ivan. Truly was a pleasure. Really enjoyed the conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Nick.